Hey everyone, it's Heather and Ashley. By now, you've probably previewed the district video message sent by Superintendent Mankins. Ashley and I wanted to reiterate how proud we are of the work that has been done for the K-6 Learning Continua, and we're really excited to get to share the work with you that has been done thus far. Before you attend your breakout session to examine the Continua more deeply, we want to go through a few reminders so that you understand the components that make up the Continua, as well as the decision-making process that was used to frame out the Continua. Ashley and I traveled to your buildings and kind of did like a kickoff 101 session with you, usually during a staff meeting. And during that staff meeting, we kind of we reviewed the four big terms as far as a learning continuum is concerned. Those big terms are learning continuum, measurement topics, learning target, and proficiency scales. Take a quick moment and read the definitions of those four terms before we move on. Hopefully those terms, reading that triggered something in your mind and you remember us talking about that. Ashley and I, we also want to encourage you to start to think about the interrelation of those terms and how they complement one another in an organized way. If you've been to the staff meeting session with us where we talk about those terms, we use an analogy of a street and houses on the street and floors and the houses and stair steps to kind of help you understand the interplay of those elements together. So take a quick look at this next slide. Hopefully that'll trigger that house analogy in your head and your brain is starting to kind of warm up and remember the things we talked about at your building staff meeting. As Ashley and I started grappling with these concepts, what is a measurement topic? What is a learning target? We quickly realized that we needed to come up with a way for everyone to clearly understand the distinction between the two. So we oftentimes use analogies, just like the house analogy, when we're trying to unpack new learning. So for the purposes of this next step, I want you to think about baking. Whether you're a guy, girl, whoever, everyone's probably has some foundational level understanding about baking. So let's think about this. We thought that even through the expression of mastery of baking, you could generate some fairly different outcomes. I mean, baking is baking, but I could make cheesecake and, Ashley, she could make tiramisu, someone else could make brownies. I mean, maybe like a fortune cookie. I have no idea. But we felt like irregardless of what you're baking, there are probably some key areas that each baker would need to master in order to land on the same outcome, which is some kind of dessert. So we want to give you a chance to kind of grapple with that experience as well. In just a minute, you're going to take out a tablet of paper and get a blank piece of paper to write on. You can either do this by yourself. If you're watching this video, in a TBT or a department meeting or a common team planning or something, you can do it with your colleagues. But irregardless of who you're with, take out a piece of paper and think about this. We want you to make a list of all the key indicators, key skills, key pieces of knowledge, anything you would need to know that would lead any baker, irregardless of skill set, to an outcome that would produce, a dessert, whether it's cheesecake, brownie, tiramisu, fortune cookies, whatever. What would those foundational skills that you need to know and be able to do as a baker, what would those be? If you are watching this video with your colleagues or grade level teammates, look at what you wrote down and compare it with your neighbor. Did you write down anything that was similar? Did you have differences? This is the interesting part of the analogy because it's always really fascinating what we consider critical pieces of knowledge when it comes to baking. And that idea of critical pieces of knowledge will really come into play when we start talking about the learning continuum in a minute. If you happen to be alone and you don't have anyone to kind of compare your answers to, take a look at this next slide and take a look at this unofficially generated list that Ashley and I came up with. All right, now that you've had a chance to kind of compare, I'm interested in what you noticed. Did you notice that your critical skills that you wrote on your piece of paper, were they pretty broad? Or were they really specific? Like, you know, everything I wrote down were key components of making warm desserts or cold desserts or desserts that were like cupcake-ish, who knows? You know, hopefully you'll see that the comparisons that you generated against the ideas that we generated are universal enough that each target, when executed with mastery, the person attempting to bake with competence could produce the desired dessert consistently, regardless of what you're making. The targets are universal enough that Ashley, Heather, Steve Griffin, who knows, that we would each be able to consistently bake that dessert with levels of mastery. These key skills or knowledge, those are the learning targets. Those are the floors on the houses. The topic of baking, that's the broader measurement topic. That's the house on the street. The street itself is probably like, you know, culinary arts or something like that. So hopefully this analogy is another way that helps you understand the interplay between those broad ideas, measurement topics, baking, and individual specific learning outcomes. Things like measuring, you know, mixing sequences, safety of, you know, kitchen equipment. Hopefully that analogy helps you understand a little bit more deeply. And you may be thinking, my gosh, Heather, Ashley, like that's so left field. But the purpose of going through this activity is to calibrate the difference between the measurement topic and the learning target. It's really important to understand the difference between the two. This analogy really helped anchor us in the work. And so we wanted to make sure that you had that same analogy to anchor to. Here pretty soon, in the next couple of days, in the next week or so, you're going to be invited to participate in a session with your building coach or building principal, department, small group. Every building's doing it a little differently. But you're going to have an opportunity to examine the learning continua that are relevant to your teaching role. So if you're, you know, a self-contained classroom, you're probably going to look at the reading, the writing, the math. I'm not sure. But your building administrator, your instructional coach, even the steering committee members will take you through an experience that allows you to interact with the continua, understand the framework of the continua, and also give feedback to the continua. During the session that you're about to participate in the next couple of days or in the next week, you're going to have access to the measurement topics and the learning targets that are on the continuum that are relevant for you. So far, the drafted continua that are completed are K6 reading, K6 writing, K6 math. We started the work in science and social studies and didn't quite make the traction and the progress that we had hoped, but we have a plan in place for how to continue momentum with that work. So those are forthcoming. We started just this past month to do the continuum work in Bunseled, grades 7 and 8. It's our hopeful outcome that by the end of this school year, we'll have a K-8 continuum for reading, writing, math, science, social studies. Next year, we will start the continuum work with 9-12. We'll kick off with them in the fall. So the purposes of the session you're about to engage in are is to give you access to the work that was done by the steering committee and to help you understand the process that was used. So that when you're actually interacting with the learning continuum, you know how it came to be and how it was developed, and you know the process that was behind it. We really want to help you understand the learning continuum, and that's the point of today's session, or whenever you do it, the next couple of days, week or so. We also want to iterate that as you prepare for the session, we want you to know that the decisions that were made regarding the learning continuum were done collaboratively and systematically. We used a process that we call the coding protocol. During the protocol, we examined every single Ohio learning standard. And we looked at those standards to decide if they were critical, helpful, or supplementary. When we say critical, we mean guaranteed, viable, not optional. We recognize that we have a lot of standards to teach, and trying to teach and assess every single one of our standards is an act of futility. It's spinning your wheels. It's rushed and covered. It's just a lot. So one of the fundamental purposes of the learning continuum was to reduce the number of standards that were taught and assessed, so that you could really hone in on those critical standards and teach those critical standards to mastery. So take a look at this next slide. This next slide will show you the process that we used. We call the coding protocol. So you can start to look at and understand the difference between what it means for something to be critical, what something means when it's helpful, and what it means when it's supplementary. We want to take time to reiterate to you how proud we are of the work that's being done, the work that has been done, the work that's going to be done in the future. Our collective investment in our students is undeniable, and we're so proud, Ashley and I, to be able to roll up our sleeves and do the work alongside you. We really hope that your session goes well with your leaders and your colleagues. We know you're probably going to leave with more questions than you came with, and that's okay. That's okay. That's part of the process. You're hopefully going to leave your session also with some increased clarity about the work and next steps. There'll be a feedback form shared with you at the end of your session. It's a place for you to anchor some of those lingering questions, wonderings, things you're not certain about. Ashley and I read every single piece of feedback that we get. We take it very seriously. We read all of it. So your questions, your curiosities, your criticisms, your affirmations, those are our most valued points of feedback, and they really, truly do guide our work. So, once again, thanks for all you do. We really feel so lucky and so blessed to work on such an incredible team. Hope your session goes well.